Most fighter planes are remembered for where they succeeded. The Bell P-39 Airacobra is remembered for where it didn't. American pilots complained about it. British pilots rejected it. Some even joked that it was more dangerous to its own pilot than the enemy. And honestly, they had a point. This was a fighter with an automobile-style door, an engine mounted behind the pilot, and a drive shaft spinning beneath his feet. At high altitude, it struggled. In a spin, it could become deadly. By all accounts, the Airacobra should have been one of World War II's failures. Instead, it became one of the deadliest Allied fighters of the entire war. Just not where anyone expected. Most stories have another side. This one's just a little stranger. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. When Bell Aircraft began designing the P-39 in the late 1930s, they approached the problem from a completely different angle. Most fighter designers start with an engine. Bell started with a gun. Not just any gun, either. A massive 37mm cannon mounted directly in the nose. It was one of the largest weapons ever fitted to a fighter aircraft at the time. There was only one problem. If the cannon occupied the nose, where do you put the engine? Bell's answer was simple. Move it behind the pilot. The Airacobra's Allison V12 engine sat in the middle of the fuselage, directly behind the cockpit. A long drive shaft ran underneath the pilot's seat and connected to the propeller up front. It looked unusual then. It still looks unusual today. The arrangement created one unexpected benefit. Without a heavy engine in the nose, Bell could use tricycle landing gear. That made the P-39 one of the first American fighters to sit level on the ground instead of resting on a tailwheel. Then there were the doors. Not a sliding canopy. Actual side-opening doors. With roll-down windows. For a fighter pilot climbing into a combat aircraft, it felt more like entering a sports car than a fighter plane. But once airborne, the Airacobra's unusual design began revealing its weaknesses. Early in development, the aircraft lost its turbo supercharger. That decision simplified production, but it also crippled high-altitude performance. Above roughly 15,000 feet, the Airacobra struggled. Unfortunately for the United States and Britain, much of the air war over Europe was fought exactly at those higher altitudes. The Royal Air Force evaluated the aircraft and quickly lost interest. American pilots weren't particularly enthusiastic either. The Airacobra developed a reputation that followed it for years. Part of the problem involved weight balance. As ammunition was fired and fuel burned away, the aircraft's center of gravity shifted. Under certain conditions, an inexperienced pilot could find himself in a dangerous spin that was difficult to recover from. Pilots even joked about it in a song. Yeah, it kind of goes like this. Don't give me a P-39 with an engine that's mounted behind. It'll tumble and roll and dig a big hole. Yeah, something like that, but yeah, this is a narration, not a sing-along. The airplane had become known as difficult, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Its reputation was established. Case closed, or so it seemed, because while the Western Allies were losing confidence in the Airacobra, another nation was about to discover exactly where it belonged. The Soviet Union. Through the Lend Lease, thousands of P-39s made their way to the Eastern Front. Getting there was an adventure all by itself. American pilots ferried them north through the United States and Alaska. Soviet pilots then took over, flying them across some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain on Earth. Temperatures dropped far below zero. Engine oil thickened like syrup. Ground crews worked in conditions that would test anybody's endurance. Yet, the airplanes kept arriving. And once they reached the front lines, something remarkable happened. The Soviets loved them. Not because the Airacobra was perfect, because it was perfect for their war. Unlike Western Europe, much of the air combat on the Eastern Front took place at lower altitudes. Suddenly, the P-39's biggest weaknesses mattered far less. What remained were its strengths. It was fast at low level. It was heavily armed. It had excellent visibility. And pilots appreciated details many Western accounts rarely mentioned. The cockpit was relatively comfortable. The heater actually worked. And the American radios were reliable. That may not sound impressive today, but in wartime combat, clear communication can mean the difference between life and death. The result was extraordinary. The P-39 became one of the most successful fighters used by the Soviet Air Force. Aircraft that American and British pilots often viewed with skepticism were now shooting down German aircraft in significant numbers. The Airacobra had finally found its mission. Perhaps the most surprising part of the story is what the Soviets didn't use it for. A common myth claims the P-39 was primarily a tank buster because of its giant cannon. In reality, its greatest success came as a fighter. It hunted aircraft, not tanks. The Airacobra's reputation was transformed from disappointment to predator, and by war's end, it had achieved something few would have predicted back in 1940. It became the highest-scoring American-built fighter in Soviet service. Not bad for an airplane many people had already written off. And then, 60 years after the war, the Airacobra had one more story left to tell. In 1944, a young Soviet pilot was flying a P-39 over the Arctic when engine trouble forced him down onto a frozen lake. The airplane broke through the ice and disappeared. For decades, it sat undisturbed beneath the cold northern water. Then, in 2004, a fisherman spotted something unusual beneath the surface. It was the tail of a Bell P-39 Airacobra. Salvage crews eventually recovered the aircraft, and what they found was remarkable. The freezing water had preserved much of the airplane. Even more astonishing, some of the original rubber components remained intact after 6 decades underwater. Today, that aircraft, known as Miss Lend Lease, has returned almost full circle. Its fuselage is displayed at the Niagara Aerospace Museum, less than an hour from where I live, and only a short distance from the Bell factory where Airacobras were once built. I stood beside it myself. After everything this airplane experienced, dismissal, combat, decades beneath the ice, and a journey halfway around the world, it somehow found its way home. The Bell P-39 Airacobra remains one of aviation history's most fascinating contradictions, an aircraft that looked ahead of its time. A fighter that carried a cannon through its nose and an engine behind its pilot. A machine criticized in one theater and celebrated in another. Most airplanes become famous because they succeed exactly as intended. The Airacobra became famous because it succeeded somewhere nobody expected. Sometimes the difference between failure and success isn't the airplane, it's where you choose to fly it. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.